The kingdom of Adornia was alive with celebration. The grand banquet, a tradition held once every 5 years, brought together nobles and royals from far and wide. The castle glittered with golden chandeliers, the air filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of goblets. Every corner of the hall was a testament to luxury. Tables overflowing with exotic fruits, rare meats, and delicacies prepared by the finest chefs. Prince Calin stood at the far end of the hall, his piercing blue eyes scanning the crowd. Despite the extravagance surrounding him, he felt detached. For years, he had endured the endless parade of noblewomen, each more concerned with his title than his heart. Tonight was no different. Women dressed in dazzling gowns whispered coyly behind their fans, their eyes seeking his attention. Yet, his mind was elsewhere, craving something more meaningful than the shallow pleasantries that filled the room. As Calin turned to retreat to a quieter corner, his gaze caught an unusual figure. She was unlike anyone else in the room, modestly dressed, her posture poised yet humble. A servant girl. Her movements were swift yet graceful as she carried a tray of wine goblets. But it wasn't her role that caught his attention. It was the air of quiet mystery she exuded. She moved with a confidence that seemed out of place for someone of her station, her emerald green eyes scanning the room with a sharpness that betrayed a hidden depth. Calin found himself watching her intently, curiosity sparking within him. It wasn't until she paused to serve a nearby guest that their eyes met. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to still. Her gaze was steady, unflinching, and it carried a weight that intrigued him. Yet, as quickly as it happened, she looked away, bowing her head and disappearing into the crowd. Unbeknownst to Calin, the servant girl, Leandra, had noticed him long before he saw her. She had trained herself to be vigilant, always aware of her surroundings. Her life depended on it. For years, she had played the role of a lowly servant, concealing her true identity. No one in the palace knew that she was more than what she appeared, a secret that, if discovered, could cost her everything. Leandra's heart raced as she moved through the hall. She had felt the prince's gaze, and it unnerved her. People like him didn't notice people like her, not unless they were looking for something. She couldn't afford to draw attention, especially not from someone as powerful as Prince Calin. As the night wore on, Calin found himself seeking her out in the crowd. He didn't understand why he was so captivated by a simple servant, but there was something about her, a quiet strength, an undeniable grace, that he couldn't ignore. When their paths crossed again, it wasn't by accident. Leandra, carrying another tray, found herself face to face with the prince. "You seem to carry yourself with more dignity than most of the guests here," Calin said, his voice soft yet commanding. Leandra froze, her mind racing. She bowed her head, forcing a polite smile. "Your Highness flatters me. I am but a servant. And yet you speak with more wit than most of the nobles I've met," he replied, studying her closely. Leandra's hands tightened around the tray as she struggled to maintain her composure. She couldn't afford to linger, couldn't afford to let him see past her carefully constructed facade. Bowing once more, she excused herself and disappeared into the bustling crowd, leaving Calin more intrigued than ever. That night, as the banquet continued, Calin found his mind drifting back to her. He didn't know her name, but he felt drawn to uncover the mystery behind her eyes. Little did he know, the servant girl who had so effortlessly captured his attention was hiding secrets that could shake the very foundations of his kingdom. The banquet was still in full swing, the atmosphere buzzing with music and chatter. Prince Calin, restless and disengaged, decided to move through the crowded hall in search of a breath of fresh air. He found himself near the serving area, where palace staff worked tirelessly to keep the event running smoothly. It was here that fate decided to intervene. A servant, rushing with a tray piled high with delicate glass goblets, stumbled on the edge of the carpet. Time seemed to slow as the tray tipped forward, its contents destined to crash onto the polished marble floor, or worse, onto the prince himself. Before anyone could react, Leandra appeared out of nowhere. Moving with precision, she caught the tray mid-air, steadying the glasses with a skill that spoke of years of practice. "Impressive," Kalen remarked, his tone laced with genuine admiration. He hadn't expected to find himself face to face with her again so soon. Leandra, breathless but composed, glanced up at him. "Only doing my duty, Your Highness," she replied, lowering her gaze respectfully. But Kalen wasn't ready to let the moment end. "Not many would handle such chaos with such grace," he said, his words carrying a warmth that made her uneasy. Leandra offered a polite smile, hoping to escape before his curiosity deepened. Yet, as she turned to leave, Kalen stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice soft but insistent. For a moment, Leandra hesitated. She knew giving her name could lead to more questions, more interactions she couldn't afford. But lying to the Crown Prince wasn't an option either. "Leandra, Your Highness," she finally answered, keeping her tone even. "Leandra," he repeated, as if testing the way it felt on his tongue. A beautiful name for someone so skilled. The compliment caught her off guard. She lowered her gaze again, murmuring a thank you before excusing herself. But as she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her, the weight of his attention stirring an unfamiliar mixture of fear and excitement within her. Over the next few days, Kalen found himself thinking about Leandra more than he cared to admit. Her quick wit and unassuming nature stood in stark contrast to the polished, rehearsed charm of the noblewomen who surrounded him. He began to notice her during quiet moments in the palace, moving through the halls, tending to her duties with quiet determination. Leandra, on the other hand, was doing everything in her power to avoid him. She knew better than to get involved with someone like Kalen. The risk was too great. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and her carefully constructed disguise could crumble. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to stay away, their paths seemed destined to cross. One evening, as Leandra was arranging flowers in the royal garden, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see Kalen standing behind her, a curious smile on his face. "Do you always work this late?" he asked, his voice light but probing. Leandra straightened, her hands brushing the petals. "There's always work to be done, Your Highness," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. Kalen stepped closer, his expression thoughtful. "You're different, Leandra," he said. "There's something about you, something I can't quite figure out." Her heart raced at his words, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I'm just a servant, Your Highness. There's nothing extraordinary about me." "I disagree," he said, his gaze unwavering. "And I intend to find out what makes you so unique." Leandra's breath hitched at his determination. She knew she couldn't afford to let him dig too deep, but her resolve was beginning to falter under the weight of his charm and persistence. As their interactions became more frequent, Kalen's fascination with Leandra grew. He admired her intelligence, her strength, and the quiet confidence she carried despite her humble position. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, drawn to someone who saw the world with unfiltered honesty. Leandra, despite her best efforts, couldn't deny the spark between them. But every time she allowed herself to indulge in a fleeting moment of connection, a voice in the back of her mind reminded her of the danger. She wasn't who Kalen thought she was, and if the truth came out, it would destroy them both. The palace was a place where secrets never stayed hidden for long, and Prince Kalen's growing interest in Leandra did not go unnoticed. Whispers began to ripple through the halls, passing from servant to servant, and eventually reaching the ears of the nobility. It wasn't every day that the Prince of Adornia paid attention to someone of such low station, and the unusual dynamic quickly became the subject of hushed conversations. Leandra could feel the weight of the gossip wherever she went. Servants stole glances at her, some with curiosity, others with disdain. She kept her head down, going about her tasks with renewed caution, but her heart was heavy with unease. The last thing she needed was attention, especially the kind that came with scrutiny. She knew how dangerous it was to stay in the spotlight, And yet, no matter how much she tried to avoid it, Caelin's interest only seemed to grow. Caelin, for his part, was unbothered by the whispers. If anything, they amused him. He was aware of the gossip surrounding his interactions with Leandra, but it didn't deter him. He saw something in her that he couldn't explain, something real and unpolished, and he wasn't about to let the opinions of others dictate his actions. However, not everyone in the palace was content to simply whisper and watch. Lady Marissa, a prominent noblewoman with a sharp tongue and an even sharper ambition, had long set her sights on becoming the future queen of Adornia. She had spent years cultivating her image, charming the court, and positioning herself as the perfect match for the prince. To see her plans threatened by a mere servant was an insult she could not tolerate. Marissa began to observe Leandra closely, her jealousy simmering beneath the surface. She noted how the prince's gaze often lingered on her, how his steps seemed to lead him wherever Leandra happened to be. But it wasn't just Caelin's attention that intrigued Marissa. It was the way Leandra carried herself. There was an air of mystery about her, a quiet confidence that didn't align with her supposed station. Late one evening, Marissa cornered one of the senior servants in the palace, a woman named Marta, who had worked there for decades. With a sly smile and a handful of gold coins, she persuaded Marta to tell her everything she knew about Leandra, but even Marta could offer little. Leandra had arrived at the palace years ago, alone and with no clear history. She worked hard, kept to herself, and never spoke of her past. The lack of information only fueled Marissa's determination. She decided to take matters into her own hands. If there was a secret to uncover, she would find it, and use it to her advantage. Meanwhile, Leandra's behavior became increasingly cautious. She avoided unnecessary interactions, chose her words carefully, and kept her distance from Caelin as much as she could. But her efforts were not enough to quell the growing tension. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of her secret threatening to crush her. One afternoon, while tending to the royal library, Leandra overheard two noblewomen whispering in the corner. "They say the prince has been spending an awful lot of time near the servant quarters," one of them said with a smirk. The other laughed softly. "It's scandalous, isn't it? But I can't help wondering. There's something strange about that girl. She's not like the others." Leandra's heart raced as she slipped out of the library unnoticed. The whispers were getting louder, and she knew it was only a matter of time before someone became bold enough to dig deeper. That night, while alone in her small room, Leandra stared out of the window at the stars. Her mind raced with thoughts of escape, but a part of her couldn't bear the idea of leaving Caelin behind. She had grown to care for him more than she should, and the thought of him uncovering her truth filled her with both fear and heartbreak. Unbeknownst to Leandra, Marissa had already begun putting her plan into motion. She enlisted the help of her loyal attendants, instructing them to watch Leandra's every move. Marissa was determined to expose the servant girl for who she truly was, no matter what it took. The palace, once a place of routine and order, was now a web of suspicion and intrigue, and as the tension mounted, it became clear that Leandra's carefully guarded secret was on the brink of being discovered. Late one night, Leandra sat in the quiet sanctuary of the palace gardens, the moonlight casting a soft glow over her troubled face. She clutched a small pendant that hung around her neck, hidden beneath the plain fabric of her servant's gown. The pendant, engraved with the crest of the lost kingdom of Aralith, was the only reminder of who she truly was, a symbol of a life stolen from her long ago. Years ago, Aralith had been a thriving kingdom known for its lush landscapes and peaceful rule. Leandra had been a carefree child, doted on by her parents, King Alden and Queen Serenia. But that peace had been shattered when betrayal struck from within. A trusted advisor, Lord Karen, had conspired with enemy forces to overthrow the royal family. On a night of fire and blood, Leandra's world was torn apart. She could still remember the chaos vividly, the shouting, the clash of swords, the terrified cries of the people. As the castle burned, her parents had made the ultimate sacrifice, sending her away with their most loyal guards to ensure the royal bloodline would survive. Disguised as a commoner, Leandra had been smuggled out of the kingdom and placed under the care of a trusted ally in Adornia. Growing up in hiding had been a struggle. Leandra had learned to blend in, suppressing her royal demeanour and adopting the humility of a servant. But the fire of Arilith still burned within her. As she grew older, she vowed to one day reclaim her throne and restore her kingdom. Her placement in Adornia's palace had been strategic. The loyalists who had saved her believed it was the safest place for her, far from the reach of Lord Caron and his allies. Over the years, Leandra had gathered scraps of information about the state of her homeland. She knew that Caron ruled with an iron fist, oppressing her people and exploiting the land. The thought of her kingdom in ruins filled her with both anger and sorrow. But her mission was not without its challenges. Leandra had always understood the importance of keeping her identity a secret. One slip, one careless word, and everything could unravel. Her life would be at risk, and the hope of reclaiming Arilith would be lost. And then there was Calen. From the moment their paths had crossed, Leandra had felt an undeniable connection to the prince. His kindness and genuine nature were unlike anything she had expected from someone of his status. But as her feelings for him grew, so did her inner turmoil. How could she reconcile her duty to her people with her heart's desire? She had always believed that love was a luxury she couldn't afford, but Calen made her question everything. One evening, as Leandra polished silverware in the servants' quarters, an older maid named Ilara approached her. Ilara had been with the palace for decades and had always treated Leandra with a maternal warmth. "You've been quiet lately, child," Ilara said, her eyes filled with concern. Leandra hesitated before responding. "Just tired, Ilara, nothing more." But Ilara wasn't convinced. She reached out, gently placing a hand on Leandra's shoulder. "You carry a heavy burden, don't you? Whatever it is, you don't have to bear it alone." Leandra felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to confide in Ilara, to unburden herself of the secret that had weighed on her for so many years, but she knew it was too dangerous. Instead, she offered a faint smile and returned to her work. Later that night, as Leandra lay in her small, dimly lit room, memories of her childhood came flooding back. She remembered the warmth of her mother's embrace, the way her father's laughter filled the halls of their castle. She clutched the pendant tightly, her resolve strengthening. No matter what, she had to find a way to reclaim her kingdom. But the more time she spent with Calen, the more complicated her mission became. How could she focus on her duty when her heart was pulling her in a different direction? Unbeknownst to Leandra, her internal struggle was about to become even more perilous. Lady Marissa, still determined to uncover Leandra's secret, had begun digging into her past. And as Marissa drew closer to the truth, Leandra's carefully constructed facade began to show cracks. The stakes were higher than ever. Leandra had to navigate the treacherous waters of palace intrigue, protect her identity, and decide whether to follow her heart or fulfill her destiny. The choices she made in the coming days would determine not only her future but the fate of 2 kingdoms. The tension in Leandra's heart reached its peak during a quiet moment in the royal gardens. Prince Calen had summoned her under the guise of needing help with arrangements for an upcoming feast, but his true intentions were far deeper. The moon hung low, its soft glow casting shadows across the manicured hedges and blooming flowers. Leandra, though wary, couldn't help but feel drawn to the intimacy of the setting. As Calen approached her, his usual confident demeanour seemed tempered by a vulnerability she had never seen before. He paused for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, before finally speaking. "Leandra," he began, his voice low but earnest. "I can no longer keep this to myself. You've captivated me in a way I never thought possible. Your kindness, your strength, your intelligence, they've all shown me what I've been missing." Leandra's breath caught in her throat. She opened her mouth to respond, but he continued before she could speak. "I don't care about titles or station. I don't care what anyone else might say. All I know is that I want you by my side, not as a servant, but as my equal, as my bride." His words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Leandra's heart raced, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life free of secrets and burdens, a life filled with love and happiness by Caelan's side. But that vision was quickly overshadowed by the weight of her mission and the responsibilities she carried. "Your Highness," she said, her voice trembling, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," he urged, stepping closer. "Say you'll give us a chance. I can protect you from anything, Leandra. Whatever you're afraid of, we can face it together." Tears welled in her eyes. How could she possibly explain the truth? How could she tell him that her life was built on a foundation of lies, that she was not who he thought she was? Before she could gather her thoughts, a rustling sound broke the moment. Unbeknownst to them, Lady Marissa had been lurking nearby, drawn by her suspicion of Leandra. Hidden behind a hedge, she had overheard every word of their conversation. A wicked smile spread across Marissa's face as she pieced together the puzzle. Caelan's affection for the servant girl was more than a passing fancy, and Leandra's hesitation hinted at a deeper secret. If Marissa could expose Leandra and humiliate her in front of the court, she could eliminate her as a rival for the prince's attention. Leandra, oblivious to Marissa's presence, struggled to find the words to respond to Caelan's heartfelt confession. Finally, she took a step back, shaking her head. "Caelan, I can't. There are things about me you don't know, things I can't tell you. Please, try to understand." He looked at her, pain flickering in his eyes. "Then help me understand. Whatever it is, we can face it together. Just don't push me away." But Leandra knew it wasn't that simple. Her duty to her people, her dream of reclaiming Aralith, couldn't be set aside for love. She turned away, her heart breaking with every step she took. That night, Marissa began setting her plan into motion. She bribed a palace guard to investigate Leandra's quarters and instructed a maid loyal to her to spread rumors about the prince's interest in a mysterious servant. She was determined to expose Leandra's secret and ruin her standing with the prince, ensuring that she would never pose a threat again. Meanwhile, Leandra wrestled with her emotions. Caelan's words replayed in her mind, a constant reminder of the life she could have if she chose love over duty. But deep down, she knew the path ahead would not allow for both. The next few days were a whirlwind of palace intrigue. Gossip about the prince's unusual affection for a servant began to spread like wildfire, creating tension among the nobility. Leandra found herself under increased scrutiny, her every move watched by curious eyes. And as Lady Marissa's schemes unfolded, Leandra realized that her secret was no longer safe. The walls were closing in, and the time to make a choice was drawing near. Would she follow her heart and risk everything for love? Or would she stay true to her mission and face the consequences of her past? The grand hall was alive with music and chatter as the royal court gathered for a momentous occasion, a celebration of Prince Caelan's upcoming coronation. The atmosphere was filled with excitement, yet an undercurrent of tension hung in the air. Leandra, though dressed in simple attire, stood at the edges of the crowd, her presence unnoticed by most. But she was keenly aware of the eyes upon her, particularly the piercing gaze of Lady Marissa, who had been quietly observing her every move for weeks. As the evening unfolded, Caelan mingled with dignitaries and nobles, his regal presence commanding attention. Leandra tried her best to blend in, keeping to the shadows, but her thoughts were far from the revelry. She had spent the past few days battling her own heart and her growing love for Caelan. Every word, Every glance from him made her long for a life she couldn't have. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the murmurs of the gathering. "Your Highness, may I have your attention?" Lady Marissa stood, her eyes locked onto Leandra, a malicious gleam in her gaze. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "I come bearing a grave accusation," she continued, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. "I have uncovered proof that this woman," she pointed a finger at Leandra, "is not the humble servant she claims to be. She is a spy from the rival kingdom of Aralith, sent to undermine the stability of Adornia." Gasps rippled through the room, and whispers of disbelief spread like wildfire. Leandra's heart sank as she tried to process the accusation. She had known Marissa was dangerous, but she had never imagined she would go so far. Lady Marissa handed a scroll to Kaelin, who stood frozen in shock, as if the words written there were the final blow. It was a forged letter from Aralith, claiming that Leandra had been sent to sabotage Adornia from within. "You see, Your Highness," Marissa said with a false note of sympathy. "She has been playing you, hiding her true identity while using your affections to further her kingdom's agenda. She has lied to all of us, and now it's clear. She is no servant, but a traitor." Kaelin's heart raced, his world spinning. He wanted to believe Leandra, wanted to confront this lie, but the evidence was overwhelming. He looked at her, searching her face for a sign of the truth, but all he saw was fear, confusion, and something deeper: guilt. The room grew colder as guards swiftly surrounded Leandra. She stood frozen, unable to react, her mind racing for a way out. Kaelin's gaze shifted from the false evidence to her, his eyes filled with doubt. I can't believe it," Kaelin whispered, his voice strained. "Not you, Leandra." Leandra's heart shattered as the guards took hold of her, pulling her away from the prince. As she was led out of the hall, she glanced back at Kaelin, hoping for a sign, a gesture of trust. But he turned his gaze away, the weight of the evidence clouding his judgment. She was thrown into the dungeon, cold and dark, the walls closing in around her. Alone, Leandra paced, trying to come to terms with what had just happened. The truth of her identity was no longer a secret, and now the consequences of her past were catching up with her. Hours passed before Kaelin arrived at the dungeon door, his expression unreadable. Leandra stood in the shadows, her face stained with tears. "You have to listen to me," she pleaded as he approached. "Please, let me explain." Kaelin's gaze softened for a moment, but doubt still lingered in his eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Leandra. You've been hiding something from me. How could you not tell me the truth?" "I couldn't," she replied, her voice breaking. "I was protecting you. I was protecting both of us. If I had told you who I was, you would have been in danger." Kaelin's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? Who are you?" Leandra took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I am the rightful heir to the throne of Aralith. My kingdom was overthrown when I was a child, and I was forced to flee. To protect myself, my guards disguised me as a commoner and placed me here, in Adornia. I have spent my life hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reclaim my throne." Kaelin staggered back, his mind reeling. "Aralith?" he whispered, as if trying to comprehend the enormity of her confession. "I never wanted this," Leandra continued, her eyes pleading. "I never wanted to fall in love with you. But my mission, my duty to my people, it's everything. If you knew the truth from the beginning, you would have been a target too. I couldn't let that happen." Tears filled her eyes as she stepped closer to him. "I love you, Kaelin, but I couldn't risk losing everything for us. You have no idea what it's like to carry the weight of an entire kingdom on your shoulders." Kaelin was silent for a long time, absorbing her words, the room heavy with tension. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. "Then why didn't you trust me? Why didn't you let me help you?" "I didn't think you would ever understand," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone could. But I never wanted to betray you, Kaelin. I never wanted to hurt you." There was a long silence as Kaelin stood frozen, his thoughts a whirlpool of confusion and emotion. Finally, he sighed, the weight of the truth settling in. "I need time to think. I need to understand everything." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Leandra alone in the cold, dark dungeon, her heart breaking as she realized that even love couldn't erase the betrayal that now hung between them. The cold stone walls of the dungeon seemed to close in around Leandra as she waited for Kaelin. Her heart was heavy, and the weight of the past few days pressed down on her. She had confessed everything, the truth of her identity, her mission, and the love she had tried so desperately to hide. Now, she was left to wonder if that confession had been enough to change his mind, or if the damage was already done. Hours passed before the sound of footsteps echoed through the silence. Leandra looked up, hoping to see Kaelin, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw him standing in the doorway. His expression was still unreadable, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes, one that held a promise. "Leandra," he said softly, stepping closer to the bars that separated them. "I've thought long and hard about what you said." Her breath caught in her throat. "And?" He nodded, his voice firm and filled with conviction. "I believe you. I believe in you. And I'm not going to let your kingdom fall, not while I still have a breath in my body." Leandra felt a wave of relief wash over her, but her mind was still clouded by the reality of her mission. "Kaelin, you don't understand. This isn't just about me. It's about an entire kingdom, a people who have lost everything. I can't risk bringing you into this. If you help me, you'll be a target too." Kaelin reached through the bars and gently cupped her face. "You've already brought me into it, Leandra. I'm with you, no matter what. If we're going to reclaim your throne, we'll do it together." His words were a balm to her broken heart, and for the first time in days, Leandra allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future with Kaelin by her side, a future where she could return to Aralith and restore what had been lost. The days that followed were filled with urgency and determination. Kaelin gathered a group of trusted advisors and loyal soldiers from within Adornia, many of whom had been sworn to Leandra's cause long before she had arrived in the kingdom. These allies, hidden among the common people and the palace staff, had quietly supported her every step of the way. With their help, Leandra's true identity was finally revealed to King Aldric of Adornia, a man known for his wisdom and fairness. He listened carefully to her story, weighing the consequences of her return to Aralith. When she finished, he stood silently for a moment, contemplating the delicate balance of power between the kingdoms. "You have proven your loyalty to Adornia, Leandra," King Aldric said, his voice measured. "And I see the strength in you. You have the heart of a queen, and I will offer my support in your mission. Aralith must be restored, and I will see that justice is done." Leandra's eyes filled with tears as she realized the weight of the king's words. It wasn't just Kaelin's support she had gained, it was the support of an entire kingdom, a kingdom that was willing to stand beside her in reclaiming her own. Meanwhile, Lady Marissa's grip on power began to crumble. Her deceit, her manipulations, and her false accusations against Leandra were finally exposed. A full investigation was conducted, and the truth came to light. Marissa had orchestrated the false accusations to ensure her own rise to power, hoping to marry Kaelin and claim the throne for herself. When the evidence was presented to the court, Lady Marissa was stripped of her titles, her wealth, and her influence. The royal council decreed that she was to be banished from Adornia, her name tarnished forever. The news spread quickly, and the people of Adornia rejoiced at the fall of the woman who had tried to tear the kingdom apart. With Marissa gone, the way was clear for Kaelin and Leandra to move forward with their plans. As Kaelin and Leandra stood together, facing the rising sun, they knew the path ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and battles. But they also knew that they would face them together, united by love, loyalty, and the shared dream of a restored kingdom. "You've given me everything," Leandra whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "You've given me hope." Kaelin smiled, his eyes shining with determination. "And together, we'll take back everything that was stolen from you." With that, they turned their eyes toward the future, knowing that no matter the obstacles ahead, their love and their united strength would guide them toward the destiny they were meant to fulfill. The winds of change swept through the streets of Aralith as Leandra, now crowned as queen, stood before her people for the first time as their rightful ruler. The coronation was a moment of triumph, not just for her, but for the kingdom that had once fallen to betrayal and darkness. Leandra's heart swelled with emotion as she gazed out over the crowd. The people of Aralith cheered, their voices rising in unison, the sound of hope and renewal filling the air. She had come a long way from the frightened girl who had hidden in the shadows of Adornia's palace. She had fought, sacrificed and loved, and now the kingdom she had been born to rule was finally hers. Beside her stood Kaelin, his presence a constant source of strength. Their love had withstood the test of time, betrayal, and treachery, and now it was the foundation of their future. Kaelin's eyes, filled with pride, never left Leandra's face as they stood hand in hand before the people. His quiet support had made her rise from the ashes of the past, and together they would rebuild Aralith and lead it to a new age of peace and prosperity. The royal palace in Aralith had been restored, its walls once again echoing with life. Gone were the days of darkness and fear. The halls now hummed with the promise of a bright future, one that Leandra would help shape with wisdom, compassion, and strength. She would rule with the love and justice she had always dreamed of, ensuring that no kingdom would ever suffer under the hands of betrayal again. Kaelin stepped closer, his hand gently brushing hers, a silent promise between them. They had been through so much together, and now they would face the challenges of ruling as partners. Their love was not just a private bond, it was a symbol of unity, a beacon of hope for both Adornia and Aralith. Their kingdoms, once divided by rivalry and betrayal, now stood united under their rule. The coronation ceremony was grand, with the people of Aralith gathered in the grand hall, awaiting the moment they had all been waiting for. Leandra stood tall in her regal attire, her crown shining brightly under the warm glow of the palace torches. Her heart beat with a sense of belonging, knowing that she had earned this moment, that it was hers and hers alone. When the ceremony reached its final moments, Leandra and Kaelin stood before the throne, facing each other as the kingdom's future was sealed in a single shared vow. "I promise to rule with love and justice," Leandra declared, her voice unwavering, "to honor the people who have stood by me and to protect the kingdom that has been reborn. I will never let the darkness of the past consume us again." Kaelin's eyes met hers, filled with the same resolve. "And I will stand by you, always," he vowed. "Together, we will lead with strength, honor, and a love that will never falter." The crown was placed upon Leandra's head, the weight of her new responsibility settling into her bones, but she knew she was ready. With Kaelin by her side, she was no longer just a servant, no longer just a woman caught between two worlds. She was the queen of Aralith, and her reign would be one of hope, unity, and unwavering love. As the coronation concluded, the people erupted in applause, and the kingdom of Aralith rejoiced. They had witnessed the rise of a queen who had fought not just for a throne, but for the very soul of their kingdom. And as Leandra and Kaelin walked hand in hand through the streets, the sun dipped below the horizon, signaling the beginning of a new dawn, a dawn filled with promise, love, and the unshakable bond between two kingdoms that had once been torn apart but were now united by the strength of a shared future. And so, with Caelan by her side and the people of both kingdoms behind her, Lyandra's reign began. The darkness of the past was behind them, and the light of a brighter tomorrow stretched out before them, endless and full of hope. Together they would lead their people into a new era, an era built on justice, compassion, and the undeniable power of love.